Maxwell Reed had eaten at Café Narbonne maybe 100 times before, always alone, always at that same table near the sidewalk, always with the same quiet routine. But never once had someone walked up and asked for the food off his plate. That's what made the voice cut through the usual city noise like a broken radio. "Can I have the rest of your food?" He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. A young woman stood a few feet away, holding a baby, wrapped in something that looked hand-knitted and worn by time. Her voice hadn't trembled and she hadn't looked ashamed. It was just a question. Direct. Honest. Maxwell stared at her, then at his plate. Pasta, half-eaten, cooling fast. His appetite had been bad lately, and the last few bites had already become background noise. What startled him wasn't her request. It was how she asked. No sad story, no performance, no hint of a hustle. She was just there. A young mother, maybe in her early 20s, standing in the middle of a city that swallowed people like her whole. He gestured to the chair. "Sit," he said, but then shook his head like he was brushing off his own suggestion. "No, hang on. You don't want leftovers. Let me get you something fresh." She hesitated, then nodded once. The waiter came back, confused for half a second, before Max ordered another pasta, bread, and tea. He added his usual smile and nod that said, "Don't ask." She told him her name was Eliza Monroe. Her daughter was named June, just 4 months old. Eliza didn't spill her life story all at once. It came in soft waves while they waited for the food. She had come to Portland 6 months ago, left in a rush. No details, but enough for Max to read between the lines. The bruises weren't visible, but the exits always had the same sound. She had landed a job at a 24-hour diner, graveyard shifts mostly, paid under the table. It hadn't lasted. 2 weeks ago, the place closed down without warning. She was staying at a women's shelter now, juggling baby bottles, job applications, and a spotty bus schedule. "There's an interview tomorrow," she said. "Housekeeping job, Marriott downtown, it's something." Max didn't ask more. He didn't need to. He'd heard enough stories in boardrooms and boardwalks to know when someone was bluffing. She wasn't. She was running on fumes, holding together what little she had left, not asking for a damn thing except food that was already going to waste. The pasta came. She ate slowly, carefully, one hand always on the baby. Max didn't say much while she ate, but he watched. He thought about the night Patricia gave him the Rolex he still wore. 25 years of marriage then. It was her idea to start the foundation. "We've been helped," she'd said. "Now it's our turn." Back then, they'd just come out the other side of chaos. He remembered nights on the floor of their first apartment, feeding their daughter cold soup and hoping the landlord wouldn't knock for rent. He remembered a man named Travis Kalansky who had handed him a job at a construction firm when Max didn't have anything to offer but calloused hands and a clean record. Travis hadn't said much, just handed over a clipboard and said, "Show up tomorrow." That moment had cracked open everything. He looked across the table at Eliza and thought, this is what it looks like just before the crack. "You and June got anywhere to go after tomorrow?" he asked when she was nearly done. She shook her head. "There's a list at the shelter for long-term housing. I'm on it, but it's slow. Real slow." Max nodded. He knew how those lists worked, knew the odds. He knew, too, what it felt like to be 23 and out of options. She wiped her mouth with a napkin. "I wasn't trying to guilt you or anything, asking about your food. I just—" She paused. "Sometimes people throw away more than they realize." He leaned forward a bit, just enough to lower his voice. "You're not trash, Eliza. Don't ever say anything like that again." She didn't answer, but he could tell the words landed somewhere. Max paid the bill. Before she could stand, he reached into his coat, pulled out a card, and wrote something on the back. "Call this number tomorrow morning. Ask for Myra Gold. Tell her Maxwell Reed said it was urgent." She glanced at the card. "Who is she?" "She runs a program for families in transition. Housing, childcare, emergency grants, job placement, all legit. I fund the thing. Use it." Eliza stared at the name, turning the card in her fingers. "Why? Because someone helped me once. I didn't deserve it, but I needed it. I think you do too." She said nothing. "You said you've got an interview at the Marriott?" Max asked, standing up. "Yeah, 10 o'clock. He nodded. "I know the general manager, Tom Bradley. I'll give him a call. I'm not promising anything, but I'll tell him what I saw tonight. That should be enough." Eliza looked stunned. She tried to say something, but no words came. Max tapped the card still in her hand. Start with that. One call. That's all. Then he turned and walked off, not waiting for a thank you. He wasn't doing it for thanks. He was doing it because when the moment came, when someone looked you in the eye and asked for just enough to make it through the next day, you didn't turn away. Not if you remembered where you came from. The next morning, Eliza stood outside the Marriott, holding June in her carrier and trying to focus on breathing. She hadn't slept. The baby had been restless, the shelter too loud. She hadn't expected to feel nervous, numb, maybe. But now her heart beat in patterns she couldn't control. The card in her pocket felt heavier than it should have. She hadn't called the number. Not yet. She didn't know why. Maybe part of her didn't trust it. Or maybe she didn't trust herself. She stepped inside, told the front desk her name, and was shown to a waiting area. Her interview wasn't for another 10 minutes. A woman in a blazer approached a moment later, introduced herself as the housekeeping manager, and walked her through a set of service doors and into the back halls of the hotel. The questions were simple. Had she done housekeeping before? Yes, once, for a summer job in high school. Was she comfortable with weekend shifts? Yes. Could she lift over 30 pounds? Yes. Was she authorized to work? Yes. She had the ID to prove it. The woman smiled, took some notes, and said she'd be in touch by Friday. As Eliza walked out into the street again, the feeling in her chest was blank. Not relief, not panic, just space. She had done what she could. Only then did she pull out the card. The number Max had written stared up at her like a dare. She ducked into a cafe and used their phone. A woman answered on the third ring. Calm voice, crisp tone. This is Myra. Eliza introduced herself, said Max had given her the number. There was a pause. Then the tone changed. Of course. Yes. He mentioned you last night. That sentence stunned her more than she expected. He had actually called. Myra explained that the Reed Foundation had a short-term housing partnership with a facility just outside downtown. There was a unit available, fully furnished, baby-safe, month-to-month. No rent for the first 3 months. After that, sliding scale. Childcare options, counseling, job placement assistance. It sounded made up. Eliza asked, "What's the catch?" "No catch," Myra replied. "Just follow through." By 3 p.m., she had signed papers. By 5, she had keys. That night, she and June slept in a quiet one-bedroom with a clean crib and a fridge stocked with essentials. No curfew, no shared bunks, no panicked women crying in the hallway. Just the soft, persistent hum of a refrigerator and the sound of her daughter breathing next to her. 2 days later, the Marriott called. She got the job. Housekeeping wasn't glamorous. It was hard. It was sweat, backaches, and cleaning up after people who didn't always bother to say thank you. But it was consistent. 3 shifts a week, sometimes 4. Benefits after 60 days. She worked while June was at daycare, paid for now by the foundation, and came home just before dinner time. She cooked rice and beans and tuna melts. She found peace in folding laundry and wiping down counters. She stopped checking over her shoulder. And slowly, without announcement or fanfare, she began to plan. She found out about night classes at the community college, nursing prerequisites. The hours were tough, but they had a scholarship fund. Myra vouched for her. The foundation covered the first semester. Maxwell didn't check in, not right away. He didn't call, didn't drop by, and that was fine. Eliza wouldn't have known what to say to him if he had. What he'd given her wasn't a handout. It was a gate. She'd chosen to walk through it. But she thought about him often. When she opened her first paycheck, when June started to laugh, when the apartment started to feel like a home. He became a ghost of a turning point. Not someone she leaned on, but someone she mentally thanked whenever she faced something hard and didn't collapse. 3 weeks into the job, she ran into Tom Bradley, the general manager. He was walking the service corridor with a clipboard and stopped to greet her. Just polite small talk, but something in the way he said, "You're doing well, Eliza. Keep it up," made her wonder. After he left, her supervisor pulled her aside. "You know the GM never talks to staff unless it's a problem, right? You've got someone pulling for you upstairs." She nodded, saying nothing. But that night, she sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Myra, not to Tom, to Maxwell. She didn't send it. Not yet. But she wrote it all out. She told him that the interview had gone well, that she'd gotten the apartment, that June had a safe place to sleep, and that for the first time in months, she had too. She told him she hadn't expected any of it to be real. That kindness like his didn't happen anymore, not without strings. But there had been no strings, only trust. She wrote, "You didn't know me, but you saw me, and somehow that was enough." She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and placed it in her nightstand drawer. She'd send it when she was ready, maybe after her first semester, maybe after June's first birthday. For now, she had sheets to wash, classes to attend, and a life to rebuild, one long shift at a time. 3 months later, Maxwell Reed sat in the back seat of a town car, stuck in traffic outside a boardroom he had no interest in entering. He checked his watch, the same one Patricia gave him all those years ago, and told the driver to turn around. The quarterly meeting could wait. Numbers would still be numbers tomorrow. He needed air. He needed something real. He walked 2 blocks to a bench near the Riverwalk, where street musicians played old blues without asking for applause. He hadn't planned to be there. He hadn't planned anything lately. His days were increasingly filled with people who wanted something, deals, favors, introductions, and he found himself craving conversations with people who didn't or couldn't. He thought about Eliza more than he'd expected to. He hadn't reached out since that night at Café Narbonne. He hadn't needed to. Myra kept him updated through short texts. She moved in. She started work. She enrolled in night classes. That was enough for a while, but now something restless moved inside him, like an unfinished sentence that had been sitting too long. He returned to the foundation's office and asked Myra for the file. "You want to read it?" she asked. "No," he said. "I want to understand it." Myra nodded and handed over a folder. Maxwell skimmed through. Rent vouchers issued, daycare arranged, course enrollment confirmed. All the details of a life reshaping itself. But it was the handwriting at the bottom of one page that caught him. A thank you note from Eliza, dated just last week. He sat down, read every word. The handwriting was small, focused, almost nervous. "I'm trying not to mess this up. Some days are good. Some days feel like I'm just barely holding on. But for the first time in a long time, I believe holding on leads somewhere." Maxwell folded the page carefully, not because it was delicate, but because it deserved care. He looked up at Myra. "She's going to make it." "Yes," Myra said. "But not because of us. We gave her a ladder. She climbed it." That night, Maxwell skipped another dinner. Instead, he walked past the old warehouse district, where he and Patricia had once held community outreach meetings when the foundation was still just an idea scribbled on a napkin. He remembered the early days. The hunger, not just for success, but for purpose. They had built the foundation because they knew what it meant to struggle, because someone had once looked at them and said, "You matter." Somewhere along the line, the foundation had become a machine, efficient, powerful, but distant. Helping people, yes, but in a way that felt more like administration than compassion. Eliza had changed that. She had reminded him why it mattered to see the person, not just the profile. The next morning, he sent a message to the foundation team. "New policy draft incoming. I want more hands-on cases, fewer forms, more field time. Let's start with 3 profiles this month. Real presence, not just protocol." He didn't name Eliza, but he didn't need to. Myra smiled when she saw the memo. Meanwhile, Eliza had started a routine that she could almost call stable. Work in the morning, daycare pickups in the afternoon, classes at night. She was tired. Always. But the exhaustion felt like proof of movement, not stagnation. June was healthy, curious, and slowly growing out of the clothes the foundation had given her. Eliza had started keeping a journal. She wrote in it after June fell asleep, sometimes just a few words, sometimes pages. She hadn't sent Maxwell the letter yet, but she kept it in the drawer. Sometimes she reread it, not because she was unsure of the words, but because it grounded her. One night after class, she came home to find a package on her doorstep. No label, no sender, just her name written in blue ink. Inside was a book, well worn, with pages marked by someone else's history. On the inside cover, a short note. "This book got me through nights I didn't think I'd survive. I thought it might do the same for you." She didn't need to guess who M was. The book was a collection of essays by women who had rebuilt their lives from scratch. Stories of courage, confusion, small victories. She read a chapter each night, sometimes twice. The words didn't offer easy answers, but they offered presence, companionship. She wasn't alone in this path. Others had walked it. Others had stumbled and kept going. She started talking to her classmates, quietly, carefully, about forming a study group. 2 said yes. One of them was another single mother who commuted 2 buses each way. They swapped schedules, covered for each other when daycare ran late or someone had a cold. For the first time, Eliza wasn't just surviving. She was part of something. At work, she was offered a 4th shift, then a permanent role, then access to employee health care. She said yes to all of it, not because she was chasing more, but because she knew what it felt like to have nothing. She still hadn't met Maxwell again. But one day, standing in line at the post office, she saw a man in a sharp coat holding a package. He didn't see her, but she knew it was him. He stepped outside and paused, staring at the sky for just a moment before walking away. She didn't call out. She didn't follow. She just smiled and whispered, "Thank you," even though he couldn't hear it. He had given her a way forward. And that was enough. 4 months after their first meeting, Maxwell Reed stood outside Café Narbonne again, a folded newspaper in one hand, watching people pass without really seeing them. He hadn't planned on coming back. Not to this table. Not to this corner of the city that had, without warning, reshaped the way he saw everything. Inside the paper was a short profile, a human interest piece tucked between business features and lifestyle spreads. The headline was simple: "Starting over, one mother's path to a new beginning." The photo was grainy, but unmistakable. Eliza, smiling faintly, holding June. The article mentioned her work at the Marriott, her evening nursing classes, and the help she'd received through the Reed Foundation. They hadn't named him. They didn't need to. He reread it twice. Later that evening, he sat in the foundation office with Myra and asked for the last quarter's numbers, not just the grants or placement stats, but the names. He wanted to know who they had helped, how they were doing, and what had followed after the checks cleared. Myra raised an eyebrow. "You want real outcomes now?" Maxwell nodded. "We've been measuring paperwork. I want to measure people." She didn't ask why. She just handed him the files. That night, Maxwell didn't sleep. He read every name, every note, every update from caseworkers who'd driven out to apartment complexes and halfway homes. Some stories ended with jobs, some with relapse. Most were unfinished. He highlighted 3 names and wrote in the margins, "Follow up, visit personally." Something had shifted in him. He could feel it. The foundation no longer felt like an extension of his success. It felt like an obligation, a duty he'd almost lost touch with. The next day, he showed up at the Marriott unannounced. It was early, the lobby still quiet. He asked the front desk for Tom Bradley. Tom came down 10 minutes later, surprised, shaking his head with a half smile. "Max, this is new. I want to talk to you about one of your staff." "Let me guess," Tom said. "Eliza Monroe." Maxwell didn't react. He didn't have to. Tom walked him to the back office. "She's one of the strongest hires we've made in years. Shows up early, takes double shifts when others call out, never complains. Our guest review scores have gone up, if that tells you anything." "I want to keep helping her," Maxwell said. "You already have." "Not enough." Tom leaned against the desk. "What are you thinking?" "A second job offer. When she's ready. Something inside the foundation. Part-time. Outreach work. Maybe even peer mentorship. I don't want to just push funding. I want to create pathways. She could help us do that better than any board consultant ever could." Tom nodded slowly. "She's still in school." "I'm not in a hurry." They shook on it. 2 weeks later, Myra set up a lunch at a modest cafe not far from Eliza's apartment. Eliza arrived curious, a little cautious. She hadn't seen Maxwell since that night on the street. He was waiting at a corner table with 2 coffees already cooling. They skipped the small talk. He told her he'd read the article, that he admired what she was building, that he didn't want to interrupt, only expand. He explained the idea: part-time consulting with the foundation, helping new clients navigate resources, build confidence, and connect to real next steps. Peer-to-peer support. Eliza would be the first. She didn't say yes immediately. She asked questions. How many hours? Would it interfere with her job? What kind of training would she receive? Would it mean telling her story to strangers over and over? Maxwell answered honestly, "Only if you want to. Your story isn't your currency. Your voice is." She considered it for a week. Then she called Myra and said, "Let's do it." By the end of the month, Eliza had added a new line to her resume: Community Liaison, Reed Foundation. She worked 6 hours a week, mostly afternoons. She met with new applicants, reviewed their cases, and most importantly, listened. She didn't give speeches. She didn't recite slogans. She told the truth. One woman, desperate and holding a newborn not unlike June, broke down mid-meeting. "I don't even know where to start," she said. Eliza handed her a bottle of water and replied, "That's how I started too." Maxwell heard about the encounter from Myra. He didn't need to be there. He just smiled when she told him. Something was happening that he couldn't quantify in a graph or report. Not yet, but he felt it. For the first time in a long while, the foundation wasn't just a machine. It was breathing again. It had a pulse, a heartbeat. It was connected to something deeper than donation cycles or fiscal quarters. It was connected to people. And the first sign of that was a woman who'd once asked for leftovers and who now gave more than most had ever imagined. 6 months after their first encounter, Maxwell received a letter, not through the foundation, not handed off by Myra or slid across a boardroom table, but delivered directly to his office in an envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, clean, controlled, Eliza's. He waited until his calendar cleared and the office emptied before opening it. Inside were 2 pages, folded with care, and a photograph. In the photo, June was sitting upright on a colorful rug, grinning at something off camera. Her hair had thickened. She looked alert, anchored. There was a small stuffed rabbit in her lap, one ear half chewed, one eye missing. A real child living a real life. The letter began simply, "Mr. Reed, I think about that evening often." She went on to tell him that she had accepted the new job title at the foundation, that she was managing both roles, Marriott and liaison, with a rhythm that only looked impossible on paper. That night classes were slow but steady, that she had passed her first biology exam, that June had said her first word, up, that her apartment felt like home now, not just temporary shelter with clean walls. Then she wrote about something deeper. "I used to think asking for help made me weak, that every time I reached out, I was confirming someone else's story about me. Unstable, unfit, disposable. You didn't fix everything, Mr. Reed. You didn't make it all go away. But what you did that night was shift the weight. You made me feel seen. Not judged, not pitied, just seen. And that changed everything." Maxwell read that paragraph 3 times. She ended with a line that wouldn't leave him for days. "I hope someday I can pass on what you gave me, not just the practical help, but the reminder that we all matter, that none of us are too small to notice." He placed the letter in his desk drawer, right next to the photo of Patricia. Then he sat still for a long time, replaying that night outside Café Narbonne. A woman carrying a baby asking for scraps. A man who hadn't expected to feel anything that night beyond indigestion. And yet here they were, half a year later, reshaped by that one ordinary moment. That evening, Maxwell called Sarah in Seattle. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" He didn't answer right away. "I've been thinking about your mother's old phrase," he finally said. "You remember it? You mean the second chances one?" "Yeah. She used to say everyone deserves a second chance, all the time, usually after I did something dumb." Maxwell chuckled. "I think she would have added something." "What's that?" "That sometimes giving someone else a second chance gives you one too." Sarah didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "You sound different." "I am. Good different?" "I think so." After the call, he stood by the window and looked out at the city. Office lights flickered off one by one across the skyline. Taxis moved like fireflies through the intersections. Somewhere, in one of those buildings, someone else was trying to figure out how to start over. Someone was wondering if anyone would see them. Someone was carrying more than they could hold. And Maxwell understood, maybe better than he ever had, that the most meaningful moments don't come dressed like grand events. They show up as interruptions, as accidents, as unplanned detours. Sometimes they come wrapped in a question asked with trembling conviction. "Can I have your leftovers?" He thought about Eliza walking into that job interview not knowing anyone had her back, about her calling a stranger's number because someone had told her to trust it, about June learning to sit up on her own, clutching a stuffed rabbit like it was armor. He thought about how quickly lives can turn, and how rarely we notice the moment the turn begins. Back at her apartment that same night, Eliza finished folding laundry while June babbled to herself in the corner. The letter had taken her a week to write, another 3 days to decide to send. She hadn't expected a reply. She hadn't needed one. The act of writing had been enough. She pulled her journal from the nightstand and scribbled a line she hoped to remember years from now. People don't save you, but they can show you where the door is. She paused, then added another line. You still have to walk through it, and that, above all else, was what she had done. 8 months after she had first approached Maxwell Reed at Café Narbonne, Eliza Monroe found herself holding a clipboard in the lobby of a community center on 14th and Fremont. The foundation was piloting an outreach fair, tables set up for housing resources, childcare support, employment guidance, and Eliza was helping coordinate intake. She'd already spoken to a dozen people that morning, most of them exhausted, some guarded, a few openly skeptical. She didn't take it personally. She had once been them. At one point, between conversations, she caught sight of herself in the glass entryway. Not just the reflection, but the posture, the steadiness. A woman who didn't flinch when spoken to, who didn't apologize for needing space, who didn't lower her eyes when challenged. She barely recognized herself, and yet it felt earned. Her shift ended at 3. She walked the 6 blocks home, picked up June from daycare, and stopped by the grocery store for formula and oatmeal. The cashier greeted her by name. The world was starting to feel smaller in the right ways. Back at the apartment, after June went down for a nap, Eliza checked the calendar hanging on the fridge. Her midterms were next week. She was 3 chapters behind in pharmacology, and her clinical rotation was set to begin next semester. Her life now dates that meant something. Deadlines, expectations, forward motion. There were still moments when the weight of everything closed in, when bills stacked higher than expected, or when June caught a fever the night before an exam. But those moments didn't define her anymore. They didn't get the last word. That week, Maxwell called Tom Bradley again. Not to check in, just to talk. You know she's outpacing half your management staff in initiative, he said. Tom laughed. I'd hire 5 more of her if I could. Maxwell wasn't surprised. He had been watching from a distance, carefully, deliberately. Not to control, to witness. The foundation had begun shifting policy behind the scenes, less bureaucracy, more trust-based grant distribution. Eliza's work had sparked something larger, more structural. Her presence had challenged assumptions, not just about who needed help, but about who should be shaping the systems that offered it. Maxwell found himself talking about her in meetings, not by name, but as example. She didn't come to us with a perfect plan, he'd say. She came with clarity, with willingness, with the courage to ask for exactly what she needed, nothing more. It resonated. Soon, the foundation began expanding its peer mentorship program. 3 more part-time liaisons were hired, trained by Eliza. She led their first orientation session with a mix of facts, candor, and quiet fire. She didn't tell them to be inspiring. She told them to be honest. Vulnerability was not a pitch. It was a tool. Meanwhile, June was nearing her first birthday. Eliza had been planning a small gathering, just a few classmates from nursing school, some neighbors, a couple of moms from the daycare co-op. She hadn't considered inviting anyone from the foundation. It felt too formal, too exposed. But 2 days before the party, she mailed an envelope to Maxwell's office. No card, just a printed photo of June, standing now, unsteady but determined, clutching a chair leg with one hand and a balloon string with the other. On the back, Eliza wrote, "We made it to 1 year. You helped us get here. Thought you should know." Maxwell didn't respond with a note or a call. Instead, on the day of the party, a package arrived at Eliza's door. Inside was a hand-carved wooden block set, each letter of the alphabet painted a different shade, each block smooth-edged and solid. No branding, no invoice, just a small card tucked between the blocks for building something of your own. That evening, while guests filled her apartment with laughter and plates of homemade food, Eliza watched June wobble toward the coffee table where the blocks had been stacked. The child knocked them over, squealed, then began stacking again. Every fall followed by another try. Eliza smiled. Later that night, after everyone left, she picked up the blocks one by one, arranging them back into their box. She lingered on the card, reading the inscription again. No signature, but none was needed. She placed the card next to Maxwell's original business card in a small tin she kept on her bookshelf, along with June's hospital bracelet, her first daycare receipt, and the flyer from the shelter she'd left 8 months ago. Artifacts. Proof. Markers of the life she had chosen to build and the life she refused to leave behind. A full year had passed since Eliza Monroe had first stood out Café Narbonne, hungry and unsure if she'd make it through the week. Now, she sat at the same table with a different reason for being there. June was with a sitter for the afternoon, her first time away for more than a few hours. Eliza had brought a notebook intending to review study notes, but instead found herself staring at the sidewalk traffic and remembering. The noise of the city hadn't changed, but everything else had. She was deep into clinical rotations now, long days, hard cases, real lives unfolding in hospital beds where stories didn't always end well. But even in the heaviness, she had found her place. Patients trusted her. Supervisors noted her steadiness. She wasn't the best student in the class, but she was the most certain. She didn't have time to doubt herself anymore. Life demanded presence, not perfection. She'd continued part-time with the foundation. The peer mentorship program had grown under her leadership, and recently she had begun drafting a proposal for transitional housing specifically for single parents in crisis. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but Myra had read the first draft and said, "This doesn't read like a dream. It reads like a plan." That afternoon, as Eliza sipped a lukewarm tea, Maxwell appeared. She hadn't expected him, though she wasn't surprised. He always arrived quietly, as if the universe had nudged him toward whatever mattered next. He asked if he could join her. She nodded. They didn't need to talk much. Not at first. The silence between them felt earned. Finally, she said, "I didn't think this place would mean anything to me again." Maxwell smiled. Most places don't, until they do. They talked for a while. About June, about school, about the women she was now mentoring. About a woman named Nadine, who had just been accepted into a medical billing program after 5 months of couch surfing and raising 2 boys. About a teenager named Alia, who had come through the foundation with nothing but a suitcase and now had a retail job and her first apartment. She said something the other day, Eliza said she didn't want to be someone's project, just someone's possibility. Maxwell nodded slowly. "That's the line," he said. "That's the entire point." They sat and shared quiet again. Before he left, Maxwell reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo. It was old, yellowed around the edges. A woman holding a baby, both laughing like the world couldn't touch them. "Patricia and Sarah," he said, 35 years ago. Eliza held the photo gently, not to protect it, but to respect it. "She used to say everyone deserves a second chance," Maxwell continued, "and I used to think that meant giving someone what they'd lost. But I think it's more about giving someone space to become who they were meant to be before the world got to them." Eliza looked at him, absorbing the weight of that sentence. "She would have liked you," he said. "She sounds like someone I would have liked too." He stood to leave, but turned back. "That housing proposal of yours? Bring it to the board meeting next month. I want you to present it, not as a client, not as a case study, as a partner." Eliza didn't respond right away. She just nodded. Not as a courtesy, as agreement. After he left, she stayed a while longer, scribbled a few lines in her notebook, the beginning of the presentation, a list of projected costs, a quote she'd saved from one of her textbooks. Security isn't just the absence of danger, it's the presence of possibility. When she got home that night, June ran to greet her with a laugh that cracked open the silence of the apartment. Eliza scooped her up, held her close, and whispered a promise she didn't say out loud often anymore. "We're okay. We made it, and now we make more." Later, she pulled the tin from the bookshelf. Inside were the old markers of the journey. Cards, letters, receipts. She added the photo of Patricia and Sarah. It felt like it belonged there. She looked around the apartment, at the life she'd built, not in spite of struggle, but through it. She wasn't a survivor anymore. She was a builder, a mirror, a beginning. Maxwell sat in his office the next morning, the letter from Eliza still tucked in the drawer beside Patricia's photo. He'd read it again the night before, and the words had settled somewhere permanent. He thought about Sarah, now a mother herself, raising 2 daughters with more choices than Eliza ever had. He thought about how close the line could be between collapse and recovery, between being dismissed and being seen. Sometimes the only difference was one person deciding not to look away. Outside, the city kept moving. Rain threatened the edges of the morning, but Maxwell didn't close the blinds. He let the light shift across his desk, let the silence stretch before the day filled with demands. And he thought about how strange it was that a request for leftovers had become the turning point of two lives. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest, and because someone had said yes. We don't always know when grace shows up. It rarely announces itself. It looks like a chair pulled back from a table, a name remembered, a second portion of pasta, a card handed across the silence. It looks like nothing until you realize it was everything. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. Your presence here means more than words can say. This wasn't just a story. It was a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, can change the course of a life. That sometimes a second chance given to someone else becomes a second chance for ourselves. These moments of connection, of quiet humanity, are what truly shape the world we live in. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you pause, we'd love for you to support our channel. Just hit the like button. It helps more than you think. Leave a comment below to let us know what country you're watching from and how the story made you feel. Your voice matters here. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories coming. Real stories, heartfelt ones, the kind that stay with you. Thanks again for being with us today.